Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special interview. Today we have a returning guest to the show, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts of the Institute for Political Economy, located at paulcraigroberts.org. And I got to tell you, the last time that we had Dr. Roberts on the show, he warned us that America was in advanced social and economic decline, and he also told us that America was already politically gone. And that was in December of 2020, and it sure seems like things have taken a turn for the worse since then. So we need to reconnect with Dr. Roberts today, and we need to see where things stand and where things are headed, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Dr. Roberts, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Pleased to be with you.
Now, Dr. Roberts, too few people are willing to talk about just this racist transformation that's taking place in America right now. And, you know, you said all along the jury was going to convict Chauvin, and they convicted him on all three counts, Dr. Roberts. And the mainstream media is shouting systemic racism every time that there's some sort of police incident involving a white person, regardless of the circumstance. And now you got the U.S. military, and they're yielding to all these, you know, identity politics and woke demands for inclusion and diversity, whatever that means. And we've got critical race theory being taught in our schools, where blacks are taught that they're victims and whites are taught that they're the oppressors. And you know, this is taking place in our children's heads, so to say. So just could you describe, Dr. Roberts, what is taking place in America right now, and what is this leading to?
Well, it's a misnomer to call the United States the United States. It's quite clearly a disunited country. They're the disunited states. We have the blue states, that is the Democrat-controlled states, who have mandated in the public schools, including charter schools, the teaching of critical race theory, whose origins is in Jewish cultural Marxism brought into the United States in the 1930s, and has flowered and spread its tentacles. And what critical race theory amounts to is all white people are racist and oppressors, and all black people are victims. And so when you teach this, you legitimize black violence because they're oppressed and have been victimized. And you deracinate the white kids who are indoctrinated with self-guilt and have a lack of self-confidence. And so this, in effect, becomes a way of ending any sort of merit-based system, and all advancement then becomes diversity-based. They call it equity. So you move forward based on your skin color and not on merit. And we see that this affects the teaching of subjects. For example, in California now, mathematics is being de-emphasized, watered down. The kinds of superior STEM high schools, they're being dismantled and taken out of existence. And this is spread throughout. It's now in the corporate arena. For example, today the Epoch Times, which is a new newspaper that tries to report what the rest of the media doesn't. In the Epoch Times this morning, they report that the American Airlines is investigating one of their pilots who dared to oppose in his own school system a critical race theory. So here's a pilot for an airline who's not allowed to play an active role in his own school district and criticize the teaching of his kids that they are oppressors and racists without being investigated by his employer. And he's now on suspension. Well, we see this everywhere in the corporate world. You know, we saw it. It's not just American Airlines, it's Delta, it's Coca-Cola, it's Apple, it's Google, wherever you look. If you're a white person and you try to make any defense of yourself or white people, you lose your job. Now, Americans, they don't seem to be aware that this demonization of whites today goes far beyond the Nazi demonization of Jews in the 1930s. And they don't seem to understand the consequence. But the consequence is that whites are denied a voice, they're denied any defense, they're denied any ability to complain about their demonization or the demonization of their kids. And so how is this a united country? Now, for example, in California, it's mandated. I think it's also the state of Washington is mandated. In New York, it's mandated. I don't remember whether it's New York City or the whole state, but New York City has a Mexican superintendent of education, and he has imposed an anti-white regime. It's been widely discussed in the New York Post. People are pulling their kids out of the schools, they're moving out of New York. But it's basically a school system in which whites are demonized, and that's what the class is about, and that's what is forced down their throat. Well, this, of course, makes them essentially defenseless. Whereas Republican states resisting this have passed laws against teaching critical race theory. Florida, for example, has passed legislation that critical race theory can't be taught. So even, you see, even in states in which the Democrats don't control the state, if they control some local school boards, like in Florida, they bring in critical race theory. And so this required the state legislature and the governor to prohibit it, to permit, because it's a very divisive teaching. You turn the majority of the population, I mean, whites are still a majority, 60%, they're turned into evildoers who, and every one of them, I mean, you can't, systemic racism doesn't exclude the white liberals who teach it. They're guilty too. I mean, they might not realize it, but if it's a question of skin color, then the white liberal is a systemic racist too, even though they push for teaching this. This shows how stupid they are. So basically you see a system, an educational system, Hollywood, the universities as well, you see, the corporations, even the military, now enforcing critical race theory and sensitivity training, which means essentially to teach all the white people that they're racist and they have to give some kind of precedence to people of color to make up for this. Well, if you have a country that's this disunited, you essentially don't have a country. I would say today that the United States is far more divided than it was in 1860, when the outbreak of the Northern War against the South, the Northern invasion of the South, who the South refused to pay the tariff to support Northern manufacturing. It was at the economic expense of the South. They refused to pay it, left. The split today is far worse than it was in 1860, which led to an invasion of the South by the North and the most costly war in terms of lives in American history. So it seems like unless the white people all succumb to their indoctrination and their brainwashing and accept that they're evil and that they must step aside for people of color and turn over all positions in power and make restitution. If they don't accept that, then there's going to be another war. And so to call the United States is highly misleading. It is probably the most divided country on earth. There's no common basis, and we see it in the escalation of black violence.
And it sounds like this is just going to compound on itself and build on itself, because as you're promoting based on equity instead of based on merit, well, if I'm thinking like I'm forming a team, I want to have the best team with the best people that can perform to the best of their abilities. I don't want to give this person a chance because he's picked on in school, and I don't want to give this person a chance because he has this skin color, and I don't want to give this. I just want to get the best people on my team. So just as a country, you're getting further and further behind as you're advancing these types of policies. Am I understanding that correctly, Dr. Roberts?
Well, that's the result, yes. But you see, meritocracy now is declared to be racist. So we saw also, I think it was yesterday, the University of California system, the entire university system announced that it no longer looks at SAT scores or ACT scores because they are racist and exclude people of color. And so they're no longer going to consider them. And as I mentioned already in this interview, teaching of mathematics in the California schools has been watered down. So what you see is the destruction of the capability of scientific and technical skills because they are now considered tools of white racism. And so the shift is to what they call equity, which means advancement, but not on the basis of merit, because merit is racist. So the consequences, obviously, if this persists, will be you'll be a third world country without any technical and scientific skills. And we have seen already many of the STEM high schools, the science and technology high schools, being dismantled and admission requirements abandoned for the same reason, that the population of the student body is largely Asian and white. And so this is considered to be racist and unfair, and so they have to abolish the admission standards. Well, now, if you get people in these schools who are not actually qualified to be there, but have to be there in order to have equity, how does the school maintain its standards? If they're not qualified to be there, then clearly the school has got to lower down its standards, and therefore you lose these kinds of schools that prepared what few people in the United States could still produce that were capable of science and technology. Mm-hmm. So I think you're going to see, I've been saying for some time that the United States is a third world country. And I think this will make that apparent to everyone. Once you lose the capability of teaching at a high standard, you don't get it back because the people don't exist. They're not taught that way. They don't know it. How are they going to teach somebody else? And so you see, you very quickly lose the entire skill set. Just as we lost a skilled labor force by offshoring all the jobs. When you offshore the manufacturing jobs, industrial jobs, there's no way to pass those on in the population because there's no learning process. The supply system is truncated. Things are gone, and so you don't have the opportunity to learn those kinds of skills. So the same thing is now happening generally in the areas of education.
Now, Dr. Roberts, you know, for a while there over the last couple of months, I mean, it was every day, police brutality, police systemic racism, this and that. Then it kind of morphed, and it was like, oh my goodness, the coronavirus is going to surge again, and India is going off the rails, and Brazil's going off the rails, and it's the end of the world part two, and then all of a sudden you start turning on the news, and for this last couple weeks, every day I'm seeing some like multi-high-rise building being bombed and rocketed from Israel imploding in Gaza. So I just want to ask you, things have changed in the news cycle at the turn of a dime, it seems. So what is happening in Israel right now? What should we understand about what is happening, and what does that mean for America domestically and internationally, Dr. Roberts?
Well, Israel has been stealing Palestine since the 1940s. And this is illegal. And it's especially illegal for them to steal occupied territories. And everyone knows this, and yet every time the UN tries to do something about it, Washington blocks the action. So essentially, the disunited states has protected the Israeli theft of Palestine. And this is quite all right to the white liberals, who continue to be very shrill about the original colonists stealing America from the native Indians. This, of course, is an awful thing, but it gets such shrill attention, but the same people ignore the same thing happening where the Israelis are stealing Palestine. So clearly, the Israelis have a tremendous influence over the United States policy. And that then makes it possible for anyone to intervene to stop the massacres, which are routine now, of the Palestinians by the Israelis. The Israelis have succeeded in demonizing Palestinians the same way that the Nazis demonized the Jews, in the same way that critical race theory demonizes white people. So from the official narrative, all Palestinians are terrorists. All Palestinians wear bomb vests, even the little kids, 4 and 5-year-old kids. And that's why the Israelis have to shoot down the kids in the street, because they may have a bomb vest on to blow up some innocent Israelis. And this is the narrative. And so the Israelis are not, according to the narrative, doing anything but protecting themselves from terrorists. Well, of course, the terrorists have no army, no air force, no weapon systems, no command and control, but somehow they are a danger to Israel, even though they're now all herded into a very tiny area called Gaza and barricaded. So what can you do? Well, you're not really permitted to say anything about it, because that means you're an anti-Semite and that you hate Jews. You can criticize white people all you want, as long as they're Gentiles. But no, you can't criticize Israel. That means you're anti-Semite, you're a Holocaust denier, you're every kind of evil creature on earth. So it shows how people can use propaganda to elevate themselves and completely discredit the people they're massacring. I think that's essentially what's happening to white people when they go to school and learn that they're evil and they oppress blacks and they're racist. And this destroys them as a person. They lose their self-confidence, they're overwhelmed with guilt. And it's a way, essentially, of destroying people. So we're watching that. It's going on, and there's no discussion. You're not allowed to say anything. You can't do anything about it. The UN passes a resolution. The United States vetoes it. So what is happening? We're witnessing evil that's unchecked. It can't be checked. You can't stop it because it claims to be in the right. So when evil is cloaked in the right, and what is right and just is declared to be evil, you have morality turned on its head, and you have mass confusion in society.
And, continuing on this theme of evil and shifting into financial evil a little bit, I want to bring something up with you, Dr. Roberts, because, Janet Yellen, never another financial crisis in our lifetimes, Yellen. In 2017, when she was still Fed chair, she said she didn't believe there was going to be another financial crisis in our lifetimes. Now, here's what I want to ask you, and here's what I want to say, Dr. Roberts, because, to me, it just looks like we just have this utterly corrupt, tiny group of the same people around Washington and Wall Street, and they're just only serving their own narrow set of self-interests. And they put out this, sweet, short little old lady out there as the public face of the Treasury Department, because we can't get mad at her, right? But what are your thoughts, right? Because you were appointed as Assistant Secretary, Treasury Secretary under President Reagan, directly appointed by him. So just when you see this kind of stuff, Janet Yellen moving from Fed chair to highly paid event circuit speaker to now she's the Secretary of Treasury of the United States. What is going on in our markets and our economy, Dr. Roberts? And isn't it something very evil going on there?
Well, I think you correctly identified it as a small group of people serving their self-interest. The Federal Reserve was created in order to serve the interest of the big banks, and that's the only interest it's ever served. And that's, of course, the interest it continues to serve. And it's now in a fix that the way it serves the interest of the big banks is to provide enough money to bail them out of their bad investments, or to underpin the investments they've made by keeping interest rates low, bond prices high, and stock prices high. So as long as the traded financial instruments are supported by the Fed, Janet Yellen is right. There can't be a crisis because we're going to support the financial prices that the system depends on. So we've talked about this before, I believe. So what is the limit to the Fed's ability to bail things out by producing endless amounts of money to purchase the financial instruments? The limit, I have always said, is the dollar. When does the dollar get in trouble? If the dollar gets in trouble as a result of these and other policies, the Fed then has to decide, what do we do? Do we continue to protect the banks, or do we now have to protect the dollar because the entire source of American power in the world is the dollar as reserve currency? And if we have a flight from the dollar and a flight from the dollar as reserve currency, then we can't any longer pay our bills by printing money. We'll be like every other country. We've got to cover our deficit in our balance of trade, and we have to sell more in order to pay for what we import. Right now, we just create money. So this is the question. The dollar comes up, becomes under attack, people finally decide to move away from it as the international currency, then the Fed will have a problem. There will be a crisis. And it will either have to let the dollar go or it'll have to let the big banks go. There's a lot of confusion in the public mind, and particularly that of financial commentators, about public debt. You see, there's no limit on the Fed's ability to print money. And therefore, it doesn't matter how big the American public debt is, because the Fed can simply print the money and buy it up. The notion that it can't be redeemed by taxes just doesn't matter. The Fed can buy it, and has been. And not only that, but we see central banks now, they don't just buy bonds to support the bond price. They buy stocks, they buy equities. You know, the Japanese central bank is the biggest owner of Japanese ETFs, exchange traded funds. The European Central Bank buys stocks. I'm certain that the Fed will do that if it's necessary, if they're not already doing it. They'll buy anything. Commodities. They can support any price just by creating money and buying it. And so the only real question is, do they finally create so much money that people say, what is this dollar? I don't want it. It hasn't happened. So how long have we had quantitative easing and Fed support of the markets? Didn't it start in 08 or 09? You know, it's more than a decade. And we haven't had all the predictions, the hyperinflation, the debt collapse. None of these things have happened. So when I was in the Treasury, the idea that the Federal Reserve would intervene in markets to this extent, no one could have dreamed of it. We never would have dreamed of it. Monetary policy was supposed to sort of hold down inflation and keep up employment. And there are limits to how much intervention the Fed would make one way or the other. And its switching back and forth would cause short-lived recessions. And the short-lived recession would cool off the inflation a bit, and then they would start the money coming again, and the unemployment would go down, employment would rise. And it was just that sort of thing. But now you see these massive creations of money around the clock. I forget what the current production is. Is it something like 140 billion a month or something like that?
I think it's 40 billion in mortgage-backed securities, 80 billion, and I can't remember the exact amount. I think you're right on it's 140 or it's 120 right now a month, and always leaving that open-ended to increase it if they need to, which we know is going to happen. Just a couple more questions, Dr. Roberts. You know, I've heard you talk about the concept of a debt jubilee before, and it's interesting because we hear a lot of talk about from our politicians about equity. We hear a lot of talk about universal basic income. We hear a lot of talk about reparations, a lot of talk about tax hikes, taxing the rich, capital gains tax hikes, estate tax hikes, but we never hear him say anything about a debt jubilee, Dr. Roberts. So, like, what are your current thoughts on a debt jubilee, and why do our why do our leaders never even touch this subject really anymore?
I don't think they ever touched it. You know, the economist Michael Hudson is the one who has studied debt jubilees throughout history. He actually has an appointment with the Harvard Peabody Museum for studies of the ancient world. And the position of Michael Hudson, as I understand it, is that once the banks take over and the economy is financialized, the banks maneuver policy such that they convert the discretionary income of people into the payment of interest and fees on debt, so that people end up heavily indebted. Their mortgage debt, their car payment debt, their credit card debt, their student loan debt, and there's very little income after servicing these massive debts for discretionary spending to drive the economy. You know, in the Keynesian macroeconomics, it takes increases in consumer spending or investment from business to cause economic growth and more employment. Well, since the income of people is drawn off in debt service, it's nothing to drive the economy. And so Michael Hudson says the real problem we face is debt deflation, by which he means there's no ability to buy anything once you service your debt. And so prices collapse, output collapses. And so he says the way out of that is to write off debts or write them down to a level that can be serviced. Now, this is a practice that used to be done to credit to nations who were debtors and couldn't service their debts. Part of the debt would be written down so that they could service what was left. Now, why doesn't it get any attention? Well, it doesn't favor the creditor class. And the creditor class is what controls the economic policy of the country. It controls the Fed. You know, the board of directors of the New York Fed are the executives of the big New York banks. And of course, the New York Fed is the policy arm of the Federal Reserve, and so their policy is controlled by the board of directors, which is Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan and so forth. So it's not in their interest to break up the system in which they can draw off all discretion, all income into the service of debts. So I think Hudson is correct, but I don't think the policy could possibly be implemented. Though it helps if people at least understand the situation in that way. Because again, you have to say, look, if we have everybody indebted like this, and we've sent offshore all the high-paying, high-value-added, high-productivity manufacturing jobs, and much of, say, software engineering, all the kinds of jobs that produced middle-class, upper-middle-class income, which these people were less inclined to be heavily indebted because they had enough income to service their debts and to hold down their debts. They weren't dependent on building debt in order to maintain their living standards. But when you lose those jobs, what can you do? So you can, as I have emphasized for 20 years or more, the offshoring of jobs essentially destroyed the United States economy because it took away from Americans the high productivity, high value added employment, and it moved it to Asia. And the American corporations did not have to pay the Asians the value of their marginal product because of the vast excess supply of labor, which held down wages. Now, you can say eventually, after many decades, there won't be any surplus labor in these Asian countries, and therefore their wages will rise up to what they would have been if the jobs stayed in the United States. But in the meantime, the United States has gone from first world to third world. So how does it recover? And all of these things happen without any economic discussion. You can't find anything in the economic journals about it. The university economic departments, they're in total denial. Essentially, the economics profession in the entirety of the Western world is useless. It doesn't engage the problems. It serves as an apologist for corporations and the financial sector. So everywhere there's an apologist. Nowhere is there truth.
Now, Dr. Roberts, we've talked about a lot of different stuff today. So just, are any one of these things on your radar the most, or what's on your radar the most as we're moving through summer? What's Dr. Roberts going to be looking at as we move through these summer months here?
Well, I think the collapse of the West is accelerating. And certainly in the United States, it's accelerating where the founding population, still the majority population, is under constant assault. And where the economic problems are not realistically dealt with. You see, the situation is so bad. If you look at the recent military recruitment videos from the Pentagon, the recent recruitment videos from the CIA, all the emphasis is on we want more and more perversion. The military recruitment video is a Disney anime. It's an anime drawing of a young woman who wants to be strong like her two moms. So how can she be strong? She joins the U.S. military. You compare that to a Russian or Chinese recruitment film. You're looking at people that look like they can walk through brick walls. There's none of this crap. And yet we're picking fights with these people. We're recruiting people who can't fight. In fact, the Pentagon issued a report just recently that 71% of Americans of military age were unfit to be in the military. They either were too obese, or high school dropouts, or had criminal records. Now, can you believe this? 71% of the eligible people were unqualified. So,
no fighting force at all there.
And then you have to ask, how many of the warrior class, the Marines, the paratroopers, the special services, want to have transgendered officers? Who wants a black female transgendered? What happened to the Band of Brothers? If you talk to soldiers who've been in combat like Vietnam or in Afghanistan, what are they fighting for? The country? No, we're fighting to protect one another. We're Band of Brothers. We're fighting to save our own lives. Well, if you don't have a Band of Brothers, you don't have that spirit. And so I think on the whole, the Western world is in an advanced state of collapse. It was foreseen in a novel written by Jean Raspail in 1976, a French novel, The Camp of the Saints. It used to be available in English. You could get it, but it's banned. You can't find it. But it shows in a novel form, because he couldn't have done it any other way than a novel. It shows a complete collapse of self-belief in society. So the French lose all belief in themselves, all belief in their culture, their history, the society, and they permit millions and millions of third world immigrants to walk in, take over the country, ban marriage between French people, and essentially they ended up, the French are genocided. They simply ceased to exist. And then it spreads throughout Europe. Well, if you look today, you see the European governments, who are they protective of? The national ethnicities? French, the German? No, the immigrants, the immigrant invaders. They're the ones that are protected. Did you see that recently in France, a large number of retired generals and serving French military officers warned the government that its failure to represent the French people was going to cause a civil war? And what happens? They get punished.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly what happens in the Camp of the Saints.
And that's exactly what's coming here.
And it's coming. In fact, it's already here. You know, American troops are now subject to sensitivity training. So they have to go and listen to how they're racist and how they abuse people of color. And so now imagine you're a drill sergeant and you're white and you've got blacks, and oh wow, I can't do anything. I can't shape these people up. That would be racism.
Yeah.
Or or you're a field commander, you're a lieutenant colonel or colonel, and you've got some blacks that are not performing, and I can't do anything about it. I'll be court-martialed for racism. Or you've got some Me Too feminists that are causing trouble. What can you do? You can't do anything. So, in effect, I don't think the United States has an effective military. Certainly not one compared to the Chinese or the Russians. And wherever you look, you see this kind of corrosion, this erosion of confidence, of self-belief, of the ability to defend. So if you don't have that, what do you have? Nothing. So I think that in fact, I would say, this sounds very pessimistic and awful, but you asked the question. And so I would say that the collapse of Western civilization is so advanced, nothing can be done about it. You see, we take down monuments. And, not just Civil War generals, statues in the South, but Thomas Jefferson, Abe Lincoln, George Washington. All over Europe, the universities are taking down statues of their benefactors. Cambridge is removing all mementos of their most famous scientists because, they probably were racist, or they said something in a book 50 years ago, and so we have to disavow them. So you see this everywhere. I read reports in the British press several years ago, reported on them, that Cambridge University had decided that all white professors and all white administrators were now appointed a personal political commissar to monitor their use of words, pronouns, reading lists. Are you teaching something that has racist in them somehow? In other words, you can't even teach history any longer because because it was colonialism. It's all racism. And so now, how would a university as distinguished as Cambridge, with so many scholars, world-renowned, accept this? How can a great scholar accept being appointed a person of color as his political monitor, to weed out his reading lists, Pay attention to his lectures, his use of words, what concepts, what's taught, what the emphasis it is. This tells you there's no competence in Western civilization. They can't even teach it. They can't even inculcate the students in the culture of their own society. So, you worry about inflation. What does it matter?
There you have it, folks. There you have it, folks. The collapse is very advanced, and I've been writing about this for a couple weeks now, so it is way past time to come up with a plan and how you're going to deal with the collapse, because you got to be executing that plan right now. Dr. Roberts, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.